So since Trump's inauguration, we've been hearing almost nonstop about someone somewhere who's an Obama leftover that's hindering the Trump administration. In fact, the Daily Caller reported on this almost exactly a year ago that the Obama administration was attempting to handicap the Trump administration through leaks and altered documents. Then on the Washington Free Beacon, we have the headline, Obama admin loyalists, government insiders sabotage Trump White House. In the article, it says, we have members of the former administration at the highest levels who, through their actions after January 20th, have demonstrated their refusal to recognize the results of the general election, one senior administration official told the Free Beacon. They have pursued, organized, and managed a comprehensive subversion of the new administration. Well, when a new president is in charge of appointing roughly 4,000 new government employees upon taking the reins, it's no wonder our government is filled with partisan hacks and cronyism. And no, not all of the thousands and thousands of new government employees have to show competence at their job either, because competency isn't always what the president is looking for. Sometimes they're just looking for someone who will push their agenda. Now, don't get me wrong. Only some of these people constitute the deep state, which 74% of Americans now believe in, which is a good sign. But the real deep state is composed of over 8,000 managers in 75 different federal agencies. These are the senior executive service members, and Obama appointed about 7,000 of them. Now, because they're managers, they can tell new appointees what they can and cannot do. This puts the deep state in an unimaginable position of power. They're well organized, and as I just intuitively figured from the deep state, they stretch their roots into nearly all facets of the government. Now, when I was researching SES, I found this interesting guide to the Senior Executive Service from last March. Right in the introduction, they say, members of the Senior Executive Service serve in key positions just below the top presidential appointees and are the major link between these appointees and the rest of the federal workforce. These leaders operate and oversee nearly every government activity in approximately 75 federal agencies. So they admit, right in a government document, that SES is the major link between new presidential appointees and the rest of the federal workforce, meaning if an SES member doesn't want something to happen, they can squash out what the current administration is trying to do. Likewise, if they want something to happen that the current administration doesn't want, well, they're the filter for the rest of the federal workforce, so they can just push it through to some degree. Now, one thing that struck me as fascinating is the fact that it was started in 1978. Do you know why that's so interesting? Well, who was president in 1978? Jimmy Carter. Do you remember any previous video I've maybe done where I talked about Carter and his radical push for globalism? Well, yeah, I'll link it below, but you can find out all about Carter in my video on the Trilateral Commission because Carter helped to create it. For those who haven't seen the video or don't know yet, the Trilateral Commission is absolutely international, and it's used as a vehicle for consolidation of commercial and banking interests by seizing control of the government of the United States. It sure sounds a lot like the Senior Executive Service, too. The Trilateral Commission attempts and succeeds at controlling the political, the monetary, the intellectual, and the ecclesiastical centers, which constitute the four major centers of power. Carter was swamp before swamp was even a well-known term. Anyways, there are four basic types of political appointees, and there's the presidential appointments with a Senate confirmation, and this includes cabinet secretaries, their deputies, heads of most independent agencies, and ambassadors. They must be confirmed by the Senate. This constitutes roughly 1,200 people. There's also presidential appointments without Senate confirmation. This constitutes much of the White House staff and many sparse employees throughout smaller government agencies. This is roughly 350 people. There's also non-career senior executive service members. These are the people who work just below the top presidential appointees, thus acting as the link between those on the top and the rest of the political and civil service leaders throughout the government. This constitutes most of the SES members. Lastly, there are Schedule C appointments. These are the people who serve in a confidential or policy role. This means they range from schedulers to policy experts, and there's roughly 1,400 of these people. If you look at Obama's appointees carefully, which of course, I'm not going to lie, okay, I didn't look at all of them because there's about 7,000. But you can get a pretty specific vibe from looking at a decently sized handful of them. These people often did not rise up in the ranks by a merit system. They were put in place carefully, and something else that raises speculation, they were largely unqualified for the jobs. But as I said before, it's not always about being capable of doing the job or being qualified. It's about pushing an agenda. There are more SES appointees than any other type of appointee, and they're paid more than GS-15 employees. GS-15 is the top tier of government non-SES employees, and they have a base salary of a little over $101,000 up to about $132,000, whereas the senior executive service minimum salary is $124,000, and the max salary can range from like $172,000 to $187,000. Now, let's take a look back at this guide to the SES. You can see here they list executive core qualities. They say the ECQs are the primary selection criteria for the SES. While technical job-specific qualifications are important, the essence of the SES is the ability to lead. The first is leading change. This core qualification involves the ability to bring about strategic change both within and outside the organization to meet organizational goals. This ECQ requires the ability to establish an organizational vision and to implement it in a continuously changing environment. This sure sounds like they value those organizational goals and the implementation of them. Okay, they don't say those goals change. They say the environment changes, and that could lead to changes in and out of the organization to bring about the organizational goals. So look at the FBI or the DOJ. Do you think their employees like Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Page, Mueller, Rosenstein, do you think they were doing what was consistent with Obama's weaponization of the intel community? Yup, they're doing their job apparently. The second criteria is leading people. It's basically the same as the first, except it talks about bending people towards the organization's goals. The third criteria is results driven. This core qualification involves the ability to meet organizational goals and customer expectations. This ECQ requires the ability to make decisions that produce high quality results by applying technical knowledge, analyzing problems, and calculating risks. So basically, a bunch of things that are subjective because high quality results is subjective. The fourth criteria is business acumen. Basically, manage stuff strategically. This is yet another pointless qualification because it's subjective. Now, this last criteria screams globalism. Building coalitions. This core qualification requires the ability to build coalitions internally and with other federal agencies, state and local governments, nonprofit and private sector organizations, foreign governments, or international organizations to achieve common goals. So build relationships with other agencies, state governments, local governments, nonprofits, private sector organizations, foreign governments, and foreign organizations. So stretch your tentacles out as far as you possibly can. Now, when someone becomes an SES member, there are 3 different categories that they could fit into. The first is career appointments. They're provided certain job protections and benefits, and agencies can appoint their own people oftentimes to these positions as long as they meet the incredibly subjective and vague criteria I just went through. Each agency appoints at least one executive resource board. This is to see if the SES candidates meet the criteria. So the agency in charge of hiring SES people is also in charge of setting the filter for the SES people in their agency. I can smell corruption a mile away, and this reeks of it. However, they try to make it seem tougher to slip through the cracks because the Qualifications Review Board must approve the candidate also. The problem with that is that the QRB is following the same subjective criteria, but they're appointed by the Office of Personnel Management. This is yet another corrupt government office started by Jimmy Carter. It's not separate from the corruption like they'd want you to think it is. Now, the second type of category that an SES member could fit into is the non-career appointments. These people can be approved without the Qualifications Review Board, but they must be approved by the White House Office of Presidential Personnel. Often when a new president comes in, these non-career appointments are people waiting to be confirmed by the Senate. Now, the third type of category that is really split into two, and that is the limited appointments. Notice it says right in the opening there, competition and QRB certification are not required. The appointing authority determines that the appointee meets the qualification requirements for the SES position. So basically, people can be thrown into this category that don't meet the requirements, that don't have the ability to do the job, but they push the right agenda. Now, there's also limited emergency appointments, which can keep someone in a position they're not qualified for up to 18 months. However, a limited term appointment can keep someone in the government for up to 3 years in a position that will expire in 3 years or less. They're used for project positions or to facilitate the transition between administrations. So Obama could have put these people into important positions with the sole intention of screwing up Trump for nearly 3 years. These people would likely never be fired because in many cases, they're the ones in charge. But don't be fooled, okay? The number of people with SES-like credentials are what's dangerous because the FBI, the DOJ, the State Department, the Department of Defense, they're deeply connected to the SES. It's hard to find SES members as just in the mere fact that these people often don't have their name in the limelight. And that's why it's called a deep state. I mentioned Comey, Mueller, Rosenstein, McCabe, Strzok, Page, all of them. And while they may not all be SES members, they're certainly controlled by them in the FBI and the DOJ. And sure, they say that the DOJ is forbidden from having an SES system, but if you look at the membership of the Senior Executive Service Standing Performance Review Boards from 2016, you can clearly see it's for the DOJ, and they say, the DOJ announces the membership of its 2016 SES Standing Performance Review Boards. And I'll link this below, okay? There's a laundry list of people below, and I don't recognize them. These are people high up in positions in the DOJ that are SES members. In fact, just to show you how many people there are, I'll go through the entire list as fast as I can. And like I said, I highly encourage you to look through this list with how many people there are. It's obvious why I didn't go through all of these people prior to this video, but there are some that definitely deserve a closer look just because of their position. So before I scroll through fast, let's just take a look at the first category here. Office of the Attorney General. These are the SES members in 2016. Chief of Staff and Counselor to the Attorney General. There are 2 people who are the Deputy Chief of Staff and Counselor to the Attorney General, and there are 2 people who are just counselors to the Attorney General. So right there, we see 5 people, 3 of which are a filter for hiring, and all 5 give advice to the Attorney General. So this is just a quick video of me scrolling through as fast as I can. You can clearly see there's a lot of them. I've never heard of them. Again, though, that's why it's called a deep state. Now, the reason for the SES is that in the 70s, under Carter, Congress was worried that political appointees were too disconnected from the civil servants below them. Of course, the SES was then weaponized to disrupt incoming administrations, and you can see the purpose of the SES was to appoint top-level managers despite little to no training and a system not based on merits. Don't get me wrong, there are many issues in the government, and I'd fix many of them by just abolishing the department that's having issues. I have a very minimalist government outlook, but if you're going to have a complex government system where bureaucracy rules and it's easy to lose sight of swamp creatures in the vast wetlands that they've created, the system needs to be a meritocracy, not based on the agenda of the person being hired. As always, like I just said, everything is linked below, okay? Because there is a lot. Now, that's all that I have on the senior executive service members for right now. You can't look at the people on TV or appointed to important positions that we see. You have to look at the people appointing people to these positions. Those are the SES members that we need to worry about. I'll be sending out a newsletter tomorrow detailing the happenings over the last couple weeks. So sign up for the newsletter on my website. It's all linked below. It's also the best place to reach me, even though I feel like YouTube won't delete my channel at this point, if I've made it this far. If they do, though, you can also find me on BitChute. I'm not so great with uploading all of my videos there, but I try, especially the more timeless ones like this video, because it's not dependent on knowing this information now. It can be applicable until the SES is hopefully one day done away with or revamped into a meritocracy. But with how deep and far-reaching the true deep state is at this point, I don't think that it'll be going anywhere. So share this video with as many people as you can. People need to see what's going on behind the scenes. Leave a like on this video. Donation links are below, and I'll see you in the next one.